Thank you, Dr. Madhumita and Dialogue team for this invitation to speak on debating Swaraj. And I'll be speaking for 30 minutes and 35 minutes, and then we can have a discussion on why we are debating Swaraj, a very important category, normative category or empirical category during freedom struggle, and why this historical category has suddenly resurrected, re-celebrated in contemporaneity. So that would be my vantage point. Why should we debating Swaraj, or why should we do something called debating Swaraj? We need to understand and comprehend backdrop of this debate, and the backdrop of this debate is as follows. There is a hegemonic consensus towards uncritical acceptance of the sovereign. Of late, we are facing the phase or an era where uncritical acceptance of the sovereign is paramount, unapologetic, and profound. I haven't defined what is sovereign and what do you mean by sovereign, what do I understand by sovereign. In political theory, sovereign could be the state, government, law, or this concept comes also from Carl Smith and the concept of political, where sovereign is the final decider of the fate of citizens in a particular state. The sovereign should be understood in that manner. Secondly, there is a people's accountability, and people's accountability is enshrined, delineated, and made completely absolute towards the sovereign. But the sovereign's responsibility towards people is missing if we do various literature or formulations of laws of late in contemporary world or contemporary India. You can relate whatever I am saying with India or outside India, but most of the references would be from India. And we have decisions, and decisions are not decentered. So decisions are centered in the absence of any accountability of sovereign to the people. And there is something very peculiar, depeopleization. And depeopleization, two important values of liberal political theory used to be on behalf of people and delegation. So on behalf of people and delegation used to be very important normative categories. But there is a complete process of depeopleization of something called on behalf of people and delegation. So there is something called on behalf of people and there is something called delegation, but these two important categories of liberal political theory, that we are taking decision on behalf of people or people have delegated their responsibility to us as in form of guardian, has been depeopleized. And depeopleized in a sense, there is a shift from classical capitalism to new liberal capitalism. In classical capitalism, various decisions were endorsed on behalf of people or through delegatory power of delegatory power of the institution. But of late in new liberal capitalism, something is very unusual. I mean, you'll find something very unusual happening, and this happening can be called specialization and technologization of decisions. So specialization and technologization of decisions are very important in new liberal classical or new liberal capitalism. I'm suggesting that this is the backdrop and we have to think about political community. And this political community is different from state and government. This political community, though I haven't mentioned, will also be different from various categories like political society, a civil society. So I'm calling it political community. And in political community, the most important thing would be ontological reminder. The political community is a form of association where ontological reminder is very important. What is ontological reminder? Ontological reminder, I'll explain when I'll come to the second part of my presentation, but ontological reminder is why we are associated with each other and how we are associated with each other. So various ontological questions become very profound, very powerful in political community. In state and government, ontological indifference is important. And what is ontological indifference is that people are to be governed. So governing norms become very important in state and government. This is the backdrop in which I am debating idea of, or debating Swaraj for idea of having political community. The first part is I am debating here what is Swaraj, what is ontological indifference, what were competing claims. And here I am locating idea of Swaraj in Indian freedom struggle. And this is a very important period to understand the etymology or metaphysics of Swaraj, the way it was contested, and Swaraj had competing claims from various corners. Why freedom struggle become very important, particularly due to colonialism. So you have imperialism or colonialism in India, and I would say that colonialism is one of the worst form of ontological indifference. Colonialism is one of the worst forms of ontological indifference. Here two important things are in practice in colonialism. One is rejection of being and reduction of being. So rejection of being is very powerful category in colonialism, and reduction of being. What is rejection of being? Rejection of being that subject or individuals converted into lifeless subject. So you are actually rejecting a person's existence, that can be called rejection of being. Reduction of being, that they are not able to govern themselves, so we are there to enlighten or to make them govern. So rejection of being and reduction of being to be governed are two important practices in colonialism. I am going to do some analogy, and the first is I am using two metaphors, the main text and a footnote. Let's read colonialism from the main text and from a footnote. So I will using three texts briefly, I will mention their name, that's all. A footnote, and three important texts are J.S. Mill, 6 volumes on India, history of India, and his son J.S. Mill, James Mill and J.S. Mill, and proclamation, British government proclamation in 1857. These are three important texts. What do they say about colonialism, or what is their take to understand colonialism? And I'll use there is a footnote, and a footnote why I am calling that, there is a book called Swaraj, the Problem of India by J.E. Elam. I don't know you have read him, but this book was published in 1930, and this book is very useless book in every sense, in comprehensive sense. But why am I using this text? Because footnote is equally barbaric as the main text. So footnote and main text are equally barbaric when it comes to colonialism and to understanding people of different territories in terms of rejection of being and reduction of being. These are two important. I don't need to underline what was the importance of James Mill, but James Mill was never visited India, but he had understanding about India. And there was a method, and he used this method, he calls this method as a critical history of India. So he invented a method called critical history, and there was hardly any criticality in history, but he used critical history. And what he defined critical history as judging history. So he was judging history of India in 6 volumes without visiting India, and he said that one could read entire about India in 1 year in a particular library than visiting India. That was aplomb about James Mill. So what was being, what was notion of being in James Mill, what was notion of rejection and reduction? If you read, and there are people who have worked on James Mill, he would call being as a criminality, debauchery, or unnatural sexual appetites. So Indians were, this being a particular being from India was criminal, debaucher, or having unnatural sexual appetites in if you read 6 volumes, particularly last 3 volumes of James Mill. So these barbarians should be governed by the civilizational. And there is a debate that and this debate is not, I don't know whether this debate is important or not. Eileen Sullivan, and the debate is that actually Bentham and James Mill were not imperialist. James Mill was imperialist. Why Bentham and James Mill were not imperialists? Because they were realizing that governing Ireland and India was fruitless exercise and that would cost lots of money, but we are governing to civilize them. That's why in that sense they were not imperialist. But other people would argue that no, I mean they were equally imperialist in terms of rejection of being and reduction of being. James Mill gives final texture, I mean, in terms of understanding India, and we should not forget that he worked for East India Company for I think more than 25 years. He was an employee of East India Company, so he had a certain understanding about India, and here he was favoring complete subjection, and separation would be India and Britain would be antithetical to the prestige of British Empire. That was his theorization. Mark Turnick is an important writer on J.S. Mill. He would say that, and there are criticism, I mean lots of criticism from post-colonial perspective to Marxist perspective about J.S. Mill. I mean, you can read Uday Mehta, Bhikhu Parikh, Dipesh Chakravarti, Partha Chatterjee, and so on. They would say that he was actually racist and imperialist. Tuning would say that no, he was not that, but he was actually tolerant imperialist. He was a tolerant imperialist. What was tolerant imperialist? Because he was there to reform Indian subcontinent. So we can call him as a so tolerant imperialist. 1858 proclamation by the Queen to the Prince, Chiefs and people of India is equally important, the main text. And there is a lexical prioritization. This proclamation by the Queen is to the Prince, to the Chiefs and the people of India. So you had already three categories of people, and I call it lexical prioritization. Here we will come various terms used by this proclamation are very derogatory in absolute sense, that subjects are there to follow rules and regulation as and when stated by Queen. These were main text. Now footnote. Footnote is of course G.E. L.M. Swaraj, The Problem of India, and I mean, I'll quote him: the Andaman might very well be utilized as a Swaraj reserve. So anyone who is talking about Swaraj should be sent to Andaman, and that was his first and the last. And the entire book is about defending that anyone who is claiming Swaraj should send to Andaman. And these are the footnotes by imperialist. Some terms are very important, like construction, endorsement, and implementation of various terms like subject. If you read all three main texts and footnote, you'll find some terms which are very peculiar. Subject, faithful, true allegiance, unfit for democratic self-government, governed and controlled. These are oft repeated terms used by these thinkers or theorists or apologists of imperialism about envisaging state and government, where ontological indifference was absolute. And ontological indifference means a state where governing norm is very absolute. Here I am not making any distinction between state and government. For me, both are similar in normative sense, not in functional sense. Foucault has made distinction between state and government when he is trying to read medieval European history till Machiavelli. Earlier state was important and now government is important, thereby governmentality is important. I am aware of that distinction, but I still say that state and government by and large are functioning as a collective unit in terms of ontological indifference. In this backdrop, you had the idea of Swaraj. Swaraj took shape in this backdrop in India. And there are two positions of Swaraj. One is minimalist positions or minimalist explanation. One is maximalist. So we have two important explanations: minimalist explanation and maximalist explanation. More or less, by and large, people who participated and not participated do agree with this formulation that we want our rule. But this is a minimalist explanation. Nobody, I mean, people would not say that, okay, Britishers should be here and they should govern us. The problem is with maximalist explanation. And I'll come to understand what is maximalist explanation vis-a-vis Swaraj. Minimalist, we agree that we don't want foreign rule. This ontological indifference is barbaric, is a very powerful. I mean, look at term etymology of barbaric. And we had just completed Plato republics, and in Plato republics, alien people or people who are not similar to us were called barbaric. So barbaric is unfamiliarization. I mean, you're not familiar with someone, you use a term called barbaric in etymological sense and normative sense. So barbaric is not something which is very progressive or which we use is a barbaric. Barbaric has inherent imperialist content which is present very much in Socrates, in Plato, till imperialist theorizations that people are barbaric and we are civilizational. So we will have now I'll focus on maximalist interpretation or explanation about Swaraj. We have three positions about Swaraj, or there could be many positions about Swaraj. One position was by Nehruji and Tilak, and they wanted Swaraj, but they were not very clear about hypothesis about future. So hypothesis about future was very much absent in both Nehruji and Tilak. They wanted some kind of relation with the imperialism, but they wanted some self-rule or autonomy kind of thing for Indian people. But second was very interesting, and this is first time Swaraj was becoming cultural Swaraj and cultural nationalism. This you can find, and I'm using those texts which are using Swaraj as a vantage point. There could be many important thinkers, but Swaraj has become very vantage point to understand what was happening during freedom struggle. Aurobindo Ghosh, and Aurobindo Ghosh uses various categories, and here culture becomes cultural, Swaraj becomes cultural Swaraj. His opposition to imperialism was in language of alien, and his proposition to have future political society was in form of indigeneity. So indigenous become very important, and his very important pamphlet which we should read, Bhavani Mandir, and this is a pamphlet by Aurobindo, and Aurobindo is talking about something very crucial, and here he is justifying using Gita as a text of violence, and not only text of violence but a text of Hindu violence. So Hindu violence becomes very important to counter alien forces in Aurobindo. So barbarization or barbarianism was replaced by Aryanization in Aurobindo. Third is very important, and which is with the Gandhi and Swaraj, and this is not only limited to Gandhi, but I'll be focusing on Gandhi. How did he understand Swaraj? Not in terms of as a political category, but as a hypothesis of future. That is very important. But to understand Gandhi, we need to some methodological twist or tweak in Gandhi's writing. For the time being, we need a suspension of religious texture. If we do, if we go by religious textures of various Gandhi's writing, then possibly will not get idea about what he was trying to say. So there should be a suspension of religious texture in Gandhi to understand and to arrive what was he thinking about Swaraj. And Gandhi was shaping Swaraj, Swaraj was shaping Gandhi, but some developments were also taking place, like 1909 takes Hind Swaraj, and Swaraj within 1 year by Gandhi in 1920. Purna Swaraj in Lahore Congress, and passing of resolution of fundamental rights and national economic program in Karachi Congress. These developments made Gandhi's version of Swaraj very powerful, and rejecting Tilak, Nehruji and Ghosh's understanding about Swaraj in India. And Gandhi was very clear about being and people to be governed. So rejection of being was profound in colonialism, and reduction of being was also profound. Gandhi did something, and it occurred to me very late, that the way he was defining Swaraj, self-rule and internal, external, or self-rule and self-restraint. The self-rule in a sense, internal in a sense, that there was a rejection of being. So we can say that we can interpret Gandhi's self as a rejection of being. That was the first proposition of colonialism. Second was reduction of being to be governed. That was external. So some etymological exercise and philosophical exercise could unpack the rejection of being and reduction of being by colonialism. In 1909 text, you don't have much developed idea about Swaraj, but later on a book which was compiled as a Village Swaraj gives some idea about Swaraj. Some idea which I can discuss about this was minimalist position by Gandhi. We can have a maximalist position, what he was actually outlining in form of Swaraj. What was the idea? Was it majoritarian Hindu Swaraj, or it was a different Swaraj? Gandhi makes it very clear in various texts of this called Village Swaraj that this is there should be a consent of people, and there should be a resistance to rule of few. These are important points which Gandhi would try to understand. And there should be educating masses to regulate and control authority. People should be able to regulate and control authority. Of course, we will not have a very sophisticated social science language in Gandhi's theoretical postulations and formulations, but these ideas were there and taking shape. And in the end of book and the beginning of book, if you read Village Swaraj, Gandhi would say that rule of all and rule of justice are important benchmarks to define Swaraj. Rule of all and rule of justice. He is no way saying that rule of and using religious categories when he is ultimately shaping and giving shape to the idea of Swaraj. But there were three important poses to Gandhi's Swaraj, and these poses are very important for two reasons. And they should not be understood as an aberration, or they should not be construed as a demolition of Gandhian idea of Swaraj, but it should be understood as an epistemological expansion of Gandhi's Swaraj, and Swaraj should not be treated as a closed concept. And these three poses were, in 1921 there was a legendary communist leader S.A. Dange, and who said that we should nationalize, and Swaraj is nothing but nationalization of resources. We cannot have Swaraj if resources are with few people. There was a C.R. Das, and he was a president before Gaya Congress in 1922, and this was a very important phrase from him: Swaraj for masses, not for classes. This was important by C.R. Das. And in 1930s, B.R. Ambedkar made very important intervention, and I quote, "Tell me what share I am to have in the Swaraj." So these were, Ambedkar was posing that, tell me what share I am to have in the Swaraj. So these three poses were very important, and they should be understood as an epistemological expansion of Swaraj, and also Swaraj not as a closed concept. Now this section, and I briefly explain what is political community, ontological reminder, and Swaraj. And political community is very important, where we will have ontological reminder. And what is ontological reminder? Ontological reminder is a rejection of ontological indifference, which is a very important feature of the state and government. Political community is very important to understand ontological reminder through two principles. We have two important principles, axioms. The first question in political community, why we are associated with each other. I mean, I'm really disturbed if I read political theory, and if you read political theory of Indian state of last 50 years, some assumptions are a priori, like loyalty, governability, state is important, the idea of citizenship, or nationalism versus non-nationalism. The people who would constitute a very core of political community, they should have this opportunity that why we are associated with each other. And these associational norms are very important in any political community. Associational norms can, and second important principle should be in political community is how to associate and how to why we should associate and how to associate. These two are important function in political community, and these two are very important in the context of some developments. Our association in political community cannot be a priori or explained in the context of class, caste or gender or race or whatever. I mean, any justification of our association in political community will not make that community political community, that will convert that community or that association into a state and government. So we have to ask fundamental question, why we are associated with each other and how we are associated with each other, and why and how are interlinked and shaping each other. I'll focus on three categories, and there could be many: class, caste and gender. We cannot have class relation, and I say that class constitute dependent relation. In political community, class constitute dependent relation, and caste and gender also constitute dependent relation. But I would say that caste and gender would constitute autonomous dependent relation. The caste and gender would go from class, but not certainly certain approximation of class. So trajectory to caste and gender will go from class, but there cannot be approximation of class per se when we try to understand caste and gender. So they are coming from class, but they are also, they have acquired autonomy in terms of infrastructure and normativity or defense of caste and gender. Why I am bringing class to understand caste and gender? Because otherwise we will have theological explanation of the existence of caste and gender. And in India, if you read right-wing political theory, caste and gender are defined in terms of something called eugenics, and eugenics has become very profound way to understand. So bring materiality, bring class to the caste and gender, not in terms of approximation, to make it materialist understanding about caste and gender. And this political community where ontological reminder will have will discard both dependent and autonomous dependent relation. Treating Swaraj as a political community will prioritize ontological reminder over ontological indifference of the state and government. There is some peculiar development in state and government which we should understand, and this is called teleological or telos, and that is governing norms. What the state has done, basically, it has created a difficult and complex situation. The situation is as follows. It has created rules and regulation, and people are being converted into subject. So there is a categorical relationship between people or subject and laws. So we have a relation between laws and people or subject, but we don't have relationship between people and people or subject and subject. So this is a very peculiar to the state and government of late. What is happening, that association with all laws and people are allowed, association among people are construed as a detrimental to the existence of peace and tranquility in political community. So these are summary, and I'll take another five. I have 5 minutes. Okay. Oh, okay. And when we treat political community as ontological reminder, we will overcome two important conundrums in liberal political theory, and this conundrum is or are these conundrums are welfare or conservative adjustment and welfare adjustment. What are conservative adjustment in political community or liberal political theory, and what is something called welfare adjustment? If we look at from conservative standpoint in liberal political theory or state and government, there is a political equality and there is an economic inequality. This is the foundation of liberal political theory or liberal political constitution. You will have political equality, but you will not have economic inequality. So conservative would say that yes, you will have political equality, don't ask about economic inequality or economic equality. You will have economic inequality in liberal political democracy. Even this political equality is used to frame something called governing norms. On behalf of people or delegation, political equality is used to frame governing norms. That is the development in liberal political community. And what is economic inequality doing here? There is an atrophy of distribution and dignity questions. Dignity distribution and dignity questions are sidelined by this categorical division of political equality and economic inequality. This is not my difference. This difference comes from E.M. Wood, a celebrated essay published in New Left Review, where she makes difference between political equality and economic inequality. I am using her formulation to understand the state. What is liberal adjustment? What is liberal adjustment? And we have to understand what is welfare adjustment. Welfare is a very important way, giving people subsidy, an idea of care. Care is one of the most important terminology of late you listen in welfare discourse. Caring is very important, giving people some kinds of rights, subsidy. Caring and subsidy are important. The fundamental question remains this in state and government, that when you talk about care per se, you are talking about ontological reminder that, oh, we had a state, we had a political community where care was very important. But when you talk about the real existence of the state and government, here ontological indifference has become profound. You cannot, I mean, your infrastructure is for ontological indifference, and what you are demanding is ontological reminder. So you are demanding care when infrastructure is not for it. And this is a serious dilemma in various democracy. If you look at, and I'm not dealing in this paper, that is part of a different debate, but look at various agreements. If you read 20 agreements from 91 till now of WTO, GATT and GATS, you would hardly have anything to do for the people. Subsidy and other things are, even education and other things are considered as a commodity or something called commodity per se. So there is a serious dilemma, care versus infrastructure of the state and government. The care question reminds that, okay, we thought we will be one country and we will care about everyone, but when you see the materiality or empirical reality of state and government, care question was long back solved by state being developed into form of ontological indifference. In the end, I will suggest something and then I will complete. Swaraj question we need to debate, but Swaraj by and large is also a historical concept, and history is very important. When Swaraj embodies historical narrative or history per se, but to make Swaraj a living concept, an encompassing concept, we have to address three crucial questions of our time, and I call it politics of intimacy, politics of anonymity, and politics of abstract space. What is politics of intimacy or intimate? The relations used for control or possessions. For example, you read carefully about discourses on caste and gender. Intimacy has been used for control of caste or possession of woman or gender person. And one of the important person who actually challenged politics of intimacy in India was B.R. Ambedkar. Look at his writings on villages and used village as a metaphor of intimacy. The way he says that villages are nothing but republics by touchables for touchable by touchables, and he called villages as a cesspool and deprived of national conscience. And in Swaraj question, intimacy, politics of intimacy needs serious addressal. I'm not saying that people have not done, but this has to be done. Secondly, the politics of intimacy, and here I would say that one of the person who would theorize or who had theorized a lot would be Gandhi. He would say that can we have political community where anonymity is profound, and anonymity can be a principle of our association. Anonymity cannot be allowed in political community, as if we read Gandhi's critique of villages, and he linked village with the rejection of anonymity, and he used cities as a metaphor, as village would be a metaphor of rejection of politics of intimacy. City would be a metaphor of rejecting anonymity in Gandhi. He linked American British imperialism with the India through cities, and cities, the way cities have exploited India and Indian villages. That is very profound theorization in Gandhi. Now a categorical or clarificatory note that Ambedkar's rejection of politics of intimacy should not be considered as acceptance of politics of anonymity. Politics of a critique by Gandhi of politics of anonymity should not be considered as acceptance of politics of intimacy. It would be better methodologically to treat their vantage point vis-a-vis political community rather than lexical priority between two individuals. Most of the discourses on Gandhi and Ambedkar have done lexical prioritization. My suggestion would be to treat their standpoints and positional perspective vis-a-vis political community, and these two would come profoundly and very powerfully in Ambedkar and Gandhi. Third, I would like to hint at third, which is very important. Intimacy and anonymity are not operating in insulation. They are not operating in insulation, or they are not in an insulatory process. They are very much part of abstract space. And I am using abstract space from Henry Lefebvre, and he is one who is giving the concept called abstract space, and there is a transition in the state from absolute space to abstract space, and this abstract space is a space of global capital. The global capital is shaping both intimate spheres and anonymous spheres, cities and villages, your private life or your public life. So abstract space is everywhere. It is in form of commodity, it is in form of bank, it is in form of networks, it is in form of anything which you would like to say. So the abstract space has generated three important developments, and these three developments are as follows. I would like to clarify to make some points about why we should understand abstract space. And in abstract space, cities are not important. I mean, earlier for capitalism, cities were very important. Now for capitalism, cities are not important. Abstract space has become very important. Bitcoin and or e-currencies are very important rather than actual financial banks. So these are abstract spaces which are affecting everyone. When we are dealing with the Swaraj, we need to understand three important developments, and these three developments are as follows. We have new liberal economy, and this is important to understand why new liberal economy does many things, but two things are very important. Everything is being commodified and commodity becomes very important. Secondly, state withdraws. This is important. In this background, second development takes place, and the second development is new liberal polity. We know about new liberal economy, that is important, but we don't know new liberal polity. The new liberal polity is taking shape in India and elsewhere. What is new liberal polity? Oh, polity is polity. What is new liberal? This is certain shift. And though I haven't mentioned this paper, but I need to underline the shift. There is a disconnect between polity and policy. Earlier, you wanted to change policy, you had to change polity. To change polity to bring change in policy. Now there is a complete disconnect between policy and polity. Polity is there, but policy is independent of various policies are independent of polity. And how this is happening? Suddenly, if you do observation in India, there is an emergence of a state within a state. We can call it independent regulatory institutions. They decide everything from market to commodity prices or to existence of various corporate companies. And polity will have no control because there won't be any executive surveillance over the policies. So this is the new liberal polities where you have a policies without polity. And third is, which is very important as I think as a student of political theory, where Swaraj questions would become very important, and I'll end here. New liberal self. There is the emergence of new liberal self. We had a self. What is this new liberal self? If we are saying that there is a change in capitalism, there is a change in polity, there is a change, then there should be a change at the self level, and this new liberal self is very profound. What is this new liberal self? This new liberal self is a self which competes against herself or himself or itself. I am competing against myself, I am not competing against you. And this profound understanding leads to depoliticization or asocialization. When the self is competing against self, and particularly her or his own self, then there is a complete disjuncture between political community and self. Here Swaraj question becomes very important, and here, in which self was defined as a acceptance of being, and this being would constitute interdependence among each other for arrival of political community. Thank you so much.
Right. Am I audible? Not. Okay. I don't know. I mean, is it working now? Is it okay? Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for the excellent paper. What I'm trying to do here, I'll just take like 5 to 6 minutes, not more than that. I'll talk about some of the, how when I read the paper, how I wanted to sort of problematize some of the conceptualizations around this ontological indifference, ontological reminder, some of the associational norms and political community. And I'll also try to position some of these conceptualizations, situate them in the context of some of the very recent debates, political debates, discussions, etc. we are seeing today in India. The paper Debating Swaraj engages with the gulf between the state and the political community, and how the two key tropes, ontological indifference and ontological reminder, challenge each other in their potential to become the foundation of governing and institutional norms. While Dr. Rai brilliantly fleshes out how colonialism seems to be the contour of ontological indifference, I'll try to sort of push it a little, and I know that ontological indifference, as he mentioned in his paper, that it is marked by a rejection of being and the reduction of people to be governed. It also kind of brings to table questions like, how should one then read something like the incorporation of a marginal community in colonial armed forces. One of the recent debates stemming out of the celebration of sort of Dalit pride in Bhima Koregaon focuses on how appointment of Mahars in one of the institutions of colonial administration accounts for upward economic mobility of an untouchable community. That was perhaps possible because of the, I mean, if I push it a little further, because of the sheer logic of indifference or anonymity of the empire, of the colonial power towards some of the hegemonic communitarian norms of society, caste norms, for example. And so sort of how do we read events, or how do we read debates in this light? Swaraj, as the paper argues, must be defined, I quote, in form of a political community wherein ontological reminders take precedence over ontological indifference of the state/government, not only helps to question institutional injustices and violence, but also keep reminding that people are at the center of discourse. There seems to be two assumptions in the paper regarding the merit of political community, which also foreground the principles of why to associate and how to associate. Political community, as the paper argues, reflects, quote, people's eagerness to live collectively interdependently. I think this point could be, I think, I mean, it's also my question to Dr. Rai. I think this point needs to be sort of, again, problematized and complicated in the context of a deeply divided society like India, where interdependence often perpetuates and sort of plays out in a very gendered and casteist distribution of labor, which tantamounts to, economic inequality again. So is association really, is interdependence really a benign term? I think we need to sort of think about that. Also, the value of civic and political participation that attributes central role to one's insertion in a political community tends to overlook the conceptualization of common good and interdependence can also have totalitarian implications. So, an overlapping consensus, for example, arising out of a political community can be exclusionary and detrimental to distributed justice. Hence sort of the grammar of political conduct that may imply a constructed idea of a community may reflect governance facilitated by a hegemonic community that reinforces, again, a certain kind of inequality. And I would like to use the example of for example, the Hindu communitarian political discourse in Gujarat that is characterized by exclusionary and divisive politics along communal lines. And so this community also, interestingly, this conception of a community is also a beneficiary of states, certain neoliberal politics, and especially in the post-liberalization era. So what we see is that the conceptualization of a community doesn't necessarily pitch for, a democratic and equal association. Lastly, there is a discussion in the paper in page 12 on how anonymity is associated with urbanism, with urban, and how it is antithetical to Gandhi's political community, which Dr. Rai has already explained. The paper also refers to how Ambedkar's rejection of the politics of intimacy is to be read as is not to be read as an acceptance of anonymity. So my intervention here would be that it's something that I work on. I work on urban spaces. So my intervention here would be that it would probably be too simplistic to assume that the urban and anonymity are synonymous. The urban has been increasingly showing micro-communitarian sort of coherence, where religious and caste-based hamlets, neighborhoods, etc., are an everyday reality in Indian cities. This also is a sort of probably a strong reminder of how, you know, a particular kind of neoliberal arrangement of capital in urban spaces tends to thrive on religion and caste and other communitarian division. So just to end, it would perhaps be pertinent to see whether ontological reminder in telling the question you know, of association can be equally problematic, not just in the classic Ambedkarian sense, where the politics of intimacy will reproduce power relations between communities, already existing power relations, uh, if we take it that way, but also in a post-liberalization state where decision-making power is often outsourced to private corporations, and it is in fact states, and it is in fact not states' absence, but states' selective and very crucial presence that determines that which private player will, you know, get to it to play. Will get more importance, and which private player will not. So here, hence privatization or of decision making, or privatization in general, is not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily imply the withdrawal of the state. In post-liberalization India, for example, it is increasingly evident how state manages to sort of reconfigure its role in the market. So that's sort of my 3 comments. Thank you. Yeah.